morning. Welcome once again to another English class. This is the first class of the term. And today I'm going to explain the evaluations for this last term 2021. And just give me 1 sec. I'm going to look for the document that is here. Wait. For this last term, 2021, this is the first activity. You have to access to Richmond Learning Platform. You have been there too many times, so now you know how to access to that site. And then there's an evaluation called listening quiz. So you're gonna solve some exercises in the platform. The first thing you have to do is to access to Richmond Learning Platform. Then you have to click on assignments. In the main menu, you have some options. You have some icons. It's the one that is book-like shaped. It got a book there. You have to click on that book, and then you will see the activity title listening quiz term number 4. You gotta solve exercises from 7 to 11. They are already assigned there, so there's no way that you forget or by accident you complete other exercises. There's no way that you can do that. And if you're wondering why we start from exercise 7 and not from exercise 1, well, the answer is very simple. Some exercises has been done in classes. Probably not only with you, but with other groups. These exercises had been completed, and you will see, or you can check the answers in the YouTube channel. When you finish your exercises, you have to submit your responses, otherwise they will not be registered. So something that you have to keep in mind is that in every exercise section, you will find like 3 or 4 different type of exercises per listening. So for example, for exercise 7, you will find 3 or 4 different sets of items. Until you finish all the sets of items per unit, well, not actually per unit, but per exercise, you have to submit it. Otherwise, it's not gonna allow you to register your responses. The evaluation is gonna be for next week. This is still activated though. It is now activated just in case that you want to take advantage of your free time and you want to start doing it now. You can start. The advantage of this is that you may listen the audios as many times as you can, as many times as you want, depending on how much you understand for the very first time that you listen the audios. If you have any technical problem with the connection to the internet or to your equipment, you have to report it to your teachers or directly to me. Some of you got my numbers, some of you had already sent me some messages requesting for things, and there's no problem if you send me a message just to inform me, to notify me that you got some trouble with the technology in general. I don't know if you have any questions or doubts about the first activity. No questions? So then the second one, for the second 35%, is an oral quiz. So that means that you will have the opportunity to finally be in class. Many of the students who have completely disappeared from the online classes will have the opportunity to reappear and also to activate their microphones. because I know that one day or for a period of time, you might be facing technical problems. I totally understand that. But since you have smartphones, uh, well, better smartphones than mine sometimes, uh, it is very complicated to believe that your microphone is not working. My microphone works, and I have a J2, Samsung J2. So you have idea how old my cell phone is, and it works. You see, the thing is that when you said that you don't have a microphone in the moment, I understand that probably in that particular moment you don't have it. It's not that you totally lack of equipment. This is not happening. But I have to believe it. It's not that I do believe it. It's just that I am very understandable. And at the end of the day, you're not lying to me. You're lying to yourself. And sadly, you're lying to your families who has been devoted to provide you good equipment, to pay you the tuition fee in this school so you may access to a good education quality. And some of you, not the ones in here, because you're here, it means that you're responsible, you're doing your job as a student. But many of you have disappeared since 2020. Not from 2021. No, you have disappeared since 2020. And 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 this is something that you particularly should uh, be aware and concerned about, because you're not getting paid. You paid to receive a service, and you don't give a damn to access to classes or anything. But this is up to you. It's your call, it's your decision. You decide what is best for you. So then we have the instructions here. On due time, you will be talking about advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons of online classes. The ones that you had faced, because you will probably say, that is easy, teacher. I just Google advantages and disadvantages of online classes and I got it. Try to think of the ones that really affect you in your context. What are the pros and cons that you, as a RUPE student, have faced during online classes? Then you will have 5 minutes. That is like 2.5 minutes per student. And you have to deliver your speech. So one thing that you can do is, one of the partners will talk about advantages and the other one about disadvantages. That would probably a good solution. So then the pairs, you will be matched up according to the number of the list, like you have been working during this year. Number 1 is going to work with number 2, number 3 with number 4, number 5 with number 6, etc. In cases, I think that you are 33. If I'm not mistaken, you are 33. So in that case, only the last 3 students will work together. Say 31, 32, and 33. The rest of you will work in pairs. You will work in pairs. Only 31, 32, and 33. In case that you are 32, this doesn't apply to you. But as far as I remember, you are 33. Check your homework planner and join the class and deliver your speech when I call your names. Important, if one of the students in the team is in face-to-face modality and the other one is at home, online, of course, you will interact synchronously through Zoom. So there's not an inconvenient, definitely it's not an inconvenient. And I'm saying this, I think that this clarification is unnecessarily since this is a very obvious thing. But since you are going around making excuses all the step of the way, I clarify. There's no problem if one of you is here or if the other one is at home. I see no problem with that. So this is not an excuse to make. And in your presentation, you have to present pictures to make your presentations more visually attractive, you see. And that will be your second evaluation. The listening quiz and the oral quiz. I don't know if you have any questions, any comments about
Yes, I have a question. For the oral speech, it's 5 minutes for each person or 5 minutes for the pair?
No, 5 minutes for the pair.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. You're welcome. Yeah, 5 minutes in total. It's like 2 minutes, 30 seconds for each person. Anybody else? More questions? So if you don't have any questions or doubts, let me share today's class content with you. We're gonna work on page 84 in your Spotlight on Literature. Spotlights on Literature. Now this is the time for Fyodor Dostoevsky to present us one of his masterpieces in literature is Crime and Punishment. But before to read and listen to the story and try to analyze the elements, it is important to read about the author's life, so you will have a better perspective of why he decided to write about this particular subject. Let me see, Henry Mauricio, can you help me please reading the first slide?
Yes, I'm here, teacher.
This one, all of this.
Okay. All the.
Please.
Okay. He born in November 11, 1821, in Moscow, Russia. Died on January 28, 1881, in the street Petersburg, Russia. Russian novelist and author. The Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky was well known in his country during his life and has since been praised around the world as a writer. He's best known for writing novels that had a great understanding of psychology.
Okay. Thank you. So things that I like to remark here is he was born in Moscow. He died in Saint Petersburg in Russia. He is considered one of the best Russian novelists in history, in literature. And Fyodor Dostoevsky's books are well known for his deep studies in psychology and philosophy as well. In every single book, you will see a dash of philosophy or psychology. And this book is not the exception. Many of his life experiences had led Dostoevsky to write in a particular way. Those books reflects his beliefs in God, in life, in death, and other aspects in human life. Now, with his childhood, maybe Dariela Artiga can help me out.
Okay, he was the son of a doctor. His family was very religious, and Dostoevsky was deeply religious all his life. He began reading readily when he was young. He was first educated by his mother, father, and tutors. But at 13 years old, he was sent to a private school.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So he was the son of a doctor, so that means that he belonged to not a high, but an accommodated social status. His family was very religious, so was he. And his deep beliefs in God, in the Catholic Church, led him to criticize the dominant philosophies in his times in the 19th century. He began reading widely when he was young, so that foster a love for literature since he was very young. He was educated at home, like you. Now you study from home. But when he got 13, when he turned 13 years old, he was sent to a private school for the very first time. Well, there is something here about his father and mother's demises. Rivas Allison, Camila, are you here? Allison Rivas, are you in class? Hello, can you help me with the slide, please? Please, Cami. Or Jose Menjivar. You cannot. Alejandra Sanchez.
Here I am.
Hello, Alejandra. It sounds
Hello.
weird to call you that.
Don't call me that, please.
Don't you like it?
Yes, I do, but it sounds strange.
It's weird. It's like, no, I'm not talking to you, right?
All right, yeah.
Okay, help me please with that one.
Okay. 2 years later, his mother died. His father, a crewman, was murdered in June 16, 1839, when Dostoevsky was 17 and attending school in St. Petersburg, Russia. Dostoevsky was trained to be a military engineer, but he disliked school and loved literature.
Thank you very much. So Dostoevsky's mom died 2 years later. He was sent to school and his father was murdered 2 years after. And he left behind a very promising career in the army. He was going to be a military engineer, but he didn't like school. And he felt that he loved literature more than anything in his life. And he started you know, there's something growing in him, a love, a passion for communist, progressive ideas, and that's why he started getting company. He kept company with scholars, with scholar people, with academic people. They got together, they gathered together, they had some meetings, and they read books that had been banned by the imperial government. By those years, by the 19th century, Russia was under the rule of the Tsars. The Tsars were like some kings, like the equivalent of the Queen of England. And so these guys had reform ideas. They were against the government. And those ideas, those subversive ideas, generate some unconformity on the authorities. And you know what happens when you criticize the government? Definitely you got arrested, especially on those authoritarian countries like El Salvador is becoming. And they were arrested. The Petrachevsky circle, the way that they call themselves, were arrested in 1849. And Dostoevsky was sentenced to death. But the word sentence is quote because it was a joke. So what kind of a joke is that? And so he was, instead of that, he was sent to serve some time of labor, of forced labor in the Siberian camps. So if you thought that the labor camps were installed for the very first time by the Nazi German political party, so you were totally wrong. They existed before the time. Dostoevsky was sentenced to work in a labor camp. He spent 4 years of his life in Siberia. All of those years, he got more ideas against the government, and because he saw firsthand what they were actually doing, or the ones that were considered political rivals. In order to understand the text, Crime and Punishment, it is important to know that Dostoevsky was a very, very religious guy. He was very orthodox. He was an Orthodox Catholic person. And that's why he criticized nihilism. Basically, the main character of Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov, he represents nihilism, but at the same time, he represented Dostoevsky's ideas, anti-nihilism. So my friend Raskolnikov is divided between nihilism and anti-nihilism, because like I said, Dostoevsky criticized that doctrine through the character of Raskolnikov. And he also creates some sort of new perspective about how flat or superficial these philosophical currents or doctrines can be, because they goes against the human nature. And let me see who can help me with this. Ramos, Eric Gabriel. Are you in class, Eric Gabriel? Andrea Corrado.
Hi, teacher.
Hello, Andrea. Help me please reading the concept of nihilism.
Okay. The rejection of all religious and moral principles
often in the belief that life in maningles, the doctrine of an extreme Russian Revolutionary Party
1900, 1900.
50, which found nothing to approve of in the established social order. Nihilism is most often associated with Friedrich
Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, who argued that its corrosive effect will eventually destroy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So basically, nihilism is the rejection of religious and moral principles. It's been said that a nihilist doesn't believe in anything at all. So one of the reasons why we do not commit crimes, and the crime here in the story is murder. The reasons why we do not commit murder is because we got principles. We know that we shall not kill, like it was established by Moses' 10 commandments. I don't remember which number is it, but in the Bible says you shall not kill. And based on that principle, based on that belief, we don't kill. But a nihilist does not believe in those things. So they might freely commit any sort of crimes and they wouldn't feel remorse, since for them, life is meaningless, totally meaningless. And Friedrich Nietzsche was a very controversial philosopher. He wrote books like The Antichrist. I haven't read The Antichrist, but one day I came across with it in one of those reading fairs here. And there was a passage that says that one of God's mistakes, or the biggest God mistakes, is to have been created human beings. And maybe that might be true, but even though it is very controversial, the books and everything that he wrote. The guy here in the picture is Friedrich Nietzsche. It's also been said that Hitler read a lot of his books and he was influenced by the doctrines of Friedrich Nietzsche. And many of his ideas that Hitler wrote in his book Mein Kampf were influenced somehow by nihilism and many other currents, of course. So now that you know this information, I think that you have a better idea about what crime and punishment is going to be about. I'm sharing the audio with you, and you have to please turn to page 84 in your books so you can listen and read at the same time. Listen while you read. Just give me 1 second while I'm looking for the audio.
Chapter 1. On an exceptionally hot evening early in July, a young man came out of the garret in which he lodged in S Place and walked slowly, as though in hesitation, towards K Bridge. He had successfully avoided meeting his landlady on the staircase. His garret was under the roof of a high, 5-storied house and was more like a cupboard than a room. The landlady who provided him with garret, dinners, and attendance lived on the floor below, and every time he went out he was obliged to pass her kitchen, the door of which invariably stood open. And each time he passed, the young man had a sick, frightened feeling, which made him scowl and feel ashamed. He was hopelessly in debt to his landlady and was afraid of meeting her. This evening, however, on coming out into the street, he became acutely aware of his fears. It would be interesting to know what it is men are most afraid of. The heat in the street was terrible, and the airlessness, the bustle and the plaster, scaffolding, bricks and dust all about him, and that special Petersburg stench, so familiar to all who are unable to get out of town in summer, all worked painfully upon the young man's already overwrought nerves. An expression of the profoundest disgust gleamed for a moment in the young man's refined face. He was, by the way, exceptionally handsome, above the average in height, slim, well-built, with beautiful dark eyes and dark brown hair. From time to time he would mutter something, from the habit of talking to himself. At these moments he would become conscious that his ideas were sometimes in a tangle, and that he was very weak. For 2 days he had scarcely tasted food. With a sinking heart and a nervous tremor, he went up to a huge house, which on one side looked on to the canal, and on the other into the street. There was a continual coming and going through the 2 gates, and in the 2 courtyards of the house. 3 or 4 doorkeepers were employed on the building. The young man was very glad to meet none of them, and at once slipped unnoticed through the door on the right and up the staircase. It was a back staircase, dark and narrow, but he was familiar with it already and knew his way, and he liked all these surroundings. In such darkness even the most inquisitive eyes were not to be dreaded. If I am so scared now, what would it be if it somehow came to pass that I were really going to do it? He could not help asking himself as he reached the 4th story. He rang the bell of the old woman's flat. The bell gave a faint tinkle, as though it were made of tin and not of copper. The little flats in such houses always have bells that ring like that. In a little while, the door was opened a tiny crack. The old woman eyed her visitor with evident distrust through the crack, and nothing could be seen but her little eyes glittering in the darkness. But seeing a number of people on the landing, she grew bolder and opened the door wide. The young man stepped into the dark entry, which was partitioned off from the tiny kitchen. The old woman stood facing him in silence and looking inquiringly at him. She was a diminutive, withered-up old woman of 60, with sharp, malignant eyes and a sharp little nose. Her colorless, somewhat grizzled hair was thick, smeared with oil, and she wore no kerchief over it. Round her thin, long neck, which looked like a hen's leg, was knotted some sort of flannel rag. The old woman coughed and groaned at every instant. The young man must have looked at her with a rather peculiar expression, for a gleam of mistrust came into her eyes again. "Raskolnikov, a student, I came here a month ago." The young man made haste to mutter with a half-bow, remembering that he ought to be more polite. "I remember, my good sir, I remember quite well your coming here," the old woman said distinctly, still keeping her inquiring eyes on his face. "And here I am again on the same errand," Raskolnikov continued, a little disconcerted and surprised at the old woman's mistrust. "Perhaps she is always like that, though, only I did not notice it the other time," he thought with an uneasy feeling. The old woman paused, as though hesitating, then stepped on one side, and pointing to the door of the room, she said, letting her visitor pass in front of her, "Step in, my good sir." Chapter 5. It was about 9 o'clock when he crossed the Haymarket. At the tables and the barrows, at the booths and the shops, all the market people were closing their establishments, or clearing away and packing up their wares, and, like their customers, were going home. At the corner of an alley, a huckster and his wife had 2 tables set out with tapes, thread, and cotton handkerchiefs. They, too, had got up to go home, but were lingering in conversation with a friend who had just come up to them. This friend was Lizaveta Ivanovna, or, as everyone called her, Lizaveta, the younger sister of the old pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna, whom Raskolnikov had visited the previous day to pawn his watch and make his experiment. Raskolnikov had just passed and heard no more. He passed softly, unnoticed, trying not to miss a word. His first amazement was followed by a thrill of horror, like a shiver running down his spine. He had suddenly, quite unexpectedly learnt, that the next day at 7 o'clock, Lizaveta, the old woman's sister and only companion, would be away from home, and that therefore at 7 o'clock precisely, the old woman would be left alone. He was only a few steps from his lodging. He went in like a man condemned to death. He thought of nothing and was incapable of thinking, but he felt suddenly in his whole being that he had no more freedom of thought, no will, and that everything was suddenly and irrevocably decided. Chapter 6. The preparations to be made were few. He concentrated all his energies on thinking of everything and forgetting nothing, and his heart kept beating and thumping so that he could hardly breathe. First, he had to make a noose and sew it into his overcoat, a work of a moment. He had still the most important thing to do, to steal the axe from the kitchen. That the deed must be done with an axe he had decided long ago. As for getting the axe, that trifling business cost him no anxiety, for nothing could be easier. He stood hesitating in the gateway. Suddenly he started. From the porter's room, 2 paces away from him, something shining under the bench to the right caught his eye. He looked about him. Nobody. He dashed to the axe. It was an axe, and pulled it out from under the bench, where it lay between 2 chunks of wood. At once, before going out, he made it fast in the noose. He thrust both hands into his pockets and went out of the room. No one had noticed him. This chance raised his spirits extraordinarily. He walked along quietly and sedately, without hurry, to avoid awakening suspicion. He had to make haste, and at the same time to go some way round, so as to approach the house from the other side. Suddenly a clock somewhere struck once. What? Can it be 7:30? Impossible! It must be fast. Luckily for him, everything went well again at the gates. He was already on the stairs. Drawing a breath, pressing his hand against his throbbing heart, and once more feeling for the axe and setting it straight, he began softly and cautiously ascending the stairs, listening every minute. But the stairs, too, were quite deserted. All the doors were shut. He met no one. Am I very pale? He wondered. Am I not evidently agitated? She is mistrustful. Had I better wait a little longer till my heart leaves off thumping? But his heart did not leave off. On the contrary, as though to spite him, it throbbed more and more violently. He could stand it no longer. He slowly put out his hand to the bell and rang. Half a minute later, he rang again, more loudly. No answer. An instant later, he heard the latch unfastened. The door was as before opened a tiny crack, and again 2 sharp and suspicious eyes stared at him out of the darkness. "Good evening, Alyona Ivanovna," he began, trying to speak easily. But his voice would not obey him. It broke and shook. I have brought something, but we'd better come in, to the light." And leaving her, he passed straight into the room, uninvited. "Good heavens! What is this? Who is it? What do you want?" "Why, Alyona Ivanovna, you know me, Raskolnikov. Here, I brought you the pledge I promised the other day." And he held out the pledge. The old woman glanced for a moment at the pledge, but at once stared in the eyes of her uninvited visitor. She looked intently, maliciously, and mistrustfully. Trying to untie the string and turning to the window, to the light, all her windows were shut, in spite of the stifling heat. She left him altogether for some seconds and stood with her back to him. He unbuttoned his coat and freed the axe from the noose, but did not yet take it out altogether, simply holding it in his right hand under the coat. His hands were fearfully weak. He felt them every moment growing more numb and more wooden. He was afraid he would let the axe slip and fall. A sudden giddiness came over him. He had not a minute more to lose. He pulled the axe quite out, swung it with both arms, scarcely conscious of himself, and almost without effort, almost mechanically, brought the blunt side down on her head. He laid the axe on the ground near the body and felt at once in her pocket. He pulled out the keys at once. They were all, as before, in one bunch on a steel ring. He ran at once into the bedroom with them. Against a third wall was a chest of drawers. Strange to say, so soon as he began to fit the keys into the chest, so soon as he heard their jingling, a convulsive shudder passed over him. He suddenly fancied that the old woman might be still alive and might recover her senses. Bending down and examining her again more closely, he saw clearly that she was definitely. All at once he noticed a string on her neck. He tugged at it. Purse. The purse was stuffed very full. Raskolnikov thrust it in his pocket without looking at it and rushed back into the bedroom, this time taking the axe with him. He suddenly heard steps in the room where the old woman lay. All at once he heard distinctly a faint cry, as though someone had uttered a low, broken moan. In the middle of the room stood Lizaveta with a big bundle in her arms. She was gazing in stupefaction at her sister, white as a sheet and seeming not to have the strength to cry out. He rushed at her with the axe. Her mouth twitched piteously as one sees babies' mouths when they begin to be frightened, stare intently at what frightens them, and are on the point of screaming. And this hapless Lizaveta was so simple and had been so thoroughly scared that she did not even raise a hand. She fell at once. Raskolnikov completely lost his head and ran into the entry. Fear gained more and more mastery over him, especially after this second, quite unexpected murder. He longed to run away from the place as fast as possible, and if at that moment he had been capable of seeing and reasoning more correctly, if he had been able to realize all the difficulties of his position, the hopelessness, the hideousness, and the absurdity of it, if he could have understood how many obstacles and perhaps crimes he had still to overcome or to commit, to get out of that place and to make his way home, it is very possible that he would have flung up everything and would have gone to give himself up, and not from fear, but from simple horror and loathing of what he had done. The feeling of loathing especially surged up within him and grew stronger every minute. He stood and gazed and could not believe his eyes. The door, the outer door from the stairs, at which he had not long before waited and rung, was standing unfastened and at least 6 inches open. No lock, no bolt, all that time. The old woman had not shut it after him, perhaps as a precaution. He dashed to the door and fastened the latch. But no! The wrong thing again. I must get away. Get away. He was not fully conscious when he passed through the gateway of his house. He was already on the staircase before he recollected the axe. And yet he had a very grave problem before him, to put it back and to escape observation as far as possible in doing so. He was, of course, incapable of reflecting that it might perhaps be far better not to restore the axe at all, but to drop it later on in somebody's yard. But it all happened fortunately. The door of the porter's room was closed but not locked, so that it seemed most likely that the porter was at home. But again, the porter was not at home, and he succeeded in putting the axe back under the bench and even covering it with the chunk of wood as before. He met no one, not a soul. Afterwards, on the way to his room, the landlady's door was shut. When he was in his room, he flung himself on the sofa just as he was. He did not sleep, but sank into blank forgetfulness. If anyone had come into his room then, he would have jumped up at once and screamed. Scraps and shreds of thoughts were simply swarming in his brain, but he could not catch at one. He could not rest on one in spite of all his efforts.
Okay, and that's the end of chapter 1, 5, and 6. So the story definitely doesn't end there, but this is the only part we're gonna read because the story is very, very long. And so we see the situation going on. We're gonna watch a clip with the analysis. Well, it's some sort of summary, but most of that is an analysis, a deep analysis of the main character and also about the author. I'm sharing the clip with you in one moment. The video starts with a quotation taken straight from the book. Those are some of Raskolnikov's reflections. He said that pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. So in this quotation, what can be reflected is that Raskolnikov considered himself a very smart man, and actually he was, and with a deep heart. Yeah, yeah, he got also his feelings. Um, when before to commit the crime, he wanted to justify himself. Raskolnikov also thought that he was going to do a favor to society by killing Alyona Ivanovna. She was a pawnbroker. As you could read in the story, a pawnbroker is someone who lends you money in return of something else. So for example, let's suppose, let me have examples. Dariela and, Henry. So Henry Salvador is the pawnbroker and Dariela is Raskolnikov. So in that case, Dariela needs money because she's in a huge debt with her loan lady. The loan lady is the one that he's supposed to be paid by the rent of the place where he lives. And Salvador Henry is the pawnbroker. He's gonna lend her some money. He's gonna borrow her money so she might be able to pay her debt. But in return, Dariela has to give something like a laptop. She got a laptop and she's going to pawn the laptop to Henry. So Henry receives the laptop. He borrows some money, but when Dariela comes back with the money, she has to pay interest. And this is what Alyona Elisaveta did for a living. Borrow money with high interests. So Raskolnikov was broken. He got internal and external issues. His external problems were, was especially poverty. He ran out of funds. He ran out of money to pay his studies. And his internal conflicts has to do that he did not believe in anything at all. And he thought that committing crimes was a good thing to do just because they didn't mean anything to him. And so he said that if he killed a woman like Alyona Ivanovna, society was going to be a better place. In that way, he is recreating nihilist ideas that life is meaningless. But on the other hand, Dostoevsky, like he also did an anti-nihilism critic there, because he said that Raskolnikov felt remorse. So he felt bad of the crime that he had committed. He said that he was sick to his stomach after he has committed murder. And that this is contradictory, because a nihilist is not supposed to feel any sort of remorse of their bad actions, because for them they just they're not bad at all. And in that way you could see that there's no such thing that nihilism, that deep inside we know, or at least we should know, that God has created with some feelings, and inside of us there's a voice always telling us what is good and what is evil. But watch this clip. Is very illustrative and about Dostoevsky's life and his ideas into the story itself.
What drives someone to kill in cold blood? What goes through the murderer's mind? And what kind of a society breeds such people? Over 150 years ago, Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky took these questions up in what would become one of the best-known works of Russian literature, Crime and Punishment. First serialized in a literary magazine in 1866, the novel tells the story of Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov, a young law student in St. Petersburg. Raskolnikov lives in abject poverty, and at the start of the story has run out of funds to continue his studies. Letters from his rural home only add to his distress when he realizes how much his mother and sister have sacrificed for his success. Increasingly desperate after selling the last of his valuables to an elderly pawnbroker, he resolves on a plan to murder and rob her. But the impact of carrying out this unthinkable act proves to be more than he was prepared for. Though the novel is sometimes cited as one of the first psychological thrillers, its scope reaches far beyond Raskolnikov's inner turmoil. From dank taverns to dilapidated apartments and claustrophobic police stations, the underbelly of 19th century St. Petersburg is brought to life by Dostoevsky's searing prose. We're introduced to characters such as Marmeladov, a miserable former official who has drank his family into ruin, and Svidrigailov, an unhinged and lecherous nobleman. As Raskolnikov's own family arrives in town, their moral innocence stands in stark contrast to the depravity of those around them, even as their fates grow increasingly intertwined. This bleak portrait of Russian society reflects the author's own complex life experiences and evolving ideas. As a young writer who left behind a promising military career, Fyodor had been attracted to ideas of socialism and reform, and joined a circle of intellectuals to discuss radical texts banned by the imperial government. Upon exposure, members of this group, including Dostoevsky, were arrested. Many were sentenced to death, only to be subjected to a mock execution and last-minute pardon from the Tsar. Dostoevsky spent the next 4 years in a Siberian labor camp before being released in 1854. The experience left him with a far more pessimistic view of social reform, and his focus shifted towards spiritual concerns. In the 1864 novella Notes from Underground, he expounded on his belief that utopian Western philosophies could never satisfy the contradictory yearnings of the human soul. Crime and Punishment was conceived and completed the following year, picking up on many of the same themes. In many ways, the novel follows a common narrative thread where a promising youth is seduced and corrupted by the dangers of urban life. But its social critique cuts far deeper. Raskolnikov rationalizes that his own advancement at the cost of the exploitative pawnbroker's death would be a net benefit to society. In doing so, he echoes the doctrines of egoism and utilitarianism embraced by many of Dostoevsky's contemporary intellectuals. And in believing that his intelligence allows him to transcend moral taboos, Raskolnikov cuts himself off from his own humanity. Yet although the book is deeply concerned with morality, Crime and Punishment never comes across as merely moralizing, with each character given their own distinctive and convincing voice. One of the most remarkable things about Crime and Punishment is its ability to thrill despite the details of the central murder being revealed in the first act. Raskolnikov's crime is clear, but it's only through Dostoevsky's gripping account of the ensuing social and psychological turmoil that we learn the true nature of his punishment and the possibility of redemption. You can
Actually, the punishment, or the worst punishment that this guy received in the book is living with himself. Throughout the novel, it says that he talks to himself a lot, and he also murmured to himself constantly. And the story is based on that, his reflections, how bad he felt after he has committed that crime. And this is what his worst punishment was. His conscience. His conscience didn't let him stay or be in a state of peace. And he wanted to be caught by the police, but he was not brave enough to confess his crime. He was about to get away with it. He was about to get away with murder, but he confessed at the end of the story. But he wanted to be caught, but he did not want to confess. But at the end, he could not live with his conscience. And here is when Dostoevsky pointed out that no philosophy will never satisfy a human's need to know what is right or what is bad. This is a very interesting story, my friends. I really like you to read it, but that would be kind of difficult to do. Okay, so there are some exercises in your book. There you have chapter 1, chapter 6, but I want to focus on the exercises. So in the video, we could see that he hit her in the head with the edge, but in the book says that he hit it with the blunt side of the axe, not with the edge, but with the blunt. And in the video, we could see otherwise. And at the end, like I've been repeating constantly, he felt bad. He felt remorse after he has done such thing. Okay, the exercises are this. Literary analysis, focus on the reading. Find, please, and it's gonna be easy for you to do it online. Some examples of these different kind of conflicts. Supernatural conflicts, machine, that has to do probably with society. Man is humanity, and self with our inner self, what we have inside. Then there are some quotations taken from the reading passage, and you have to write if the conflict that he is referring here, because those are some Raskolnikov's reflections, and they also express his internal or external issues. So write down, this quotation is reflecting his moral conflicts or his economical problems. So you have to write them down here. So 10 minutes to do this, please. Okay, my friends, we're gonna leave the classroom till here and we will continue tomorrow. Thank you guys for your participation. See you.
Thanks, teacher. Have a nice day.
You too.
Thanks, teacher. Bye.